Good afternoon if you're in the UK, or good evening if you're in deepest, darkest Australia. Good morning if you're in the US, and hello wherever else you are. We are the UK Genesis podcast, okay, but today I think actually before we start, I think Peter has focused on Ben because I'm not appearing and I should be when I'm talking.
I see your face.
You see my face?
I do.
Ah, I apologise then. It's just me who can't see me. Which there we go. Hi there. We're part of the Genesis camp today. So the topic for today's panel is we'll talk about community. We're going to run along the line, get folks to introduce themselves, and then we'll have some discussions about community. If you want to get any questions in, then if you go onto the crowdcast.io website there and find the Genesis camp, then you can ask us some questions if you want to participate as well. So let's start off with, as Jackie's lovely face is on my screen at this precise moment. Jackie, do you want to introduce yourself and just give us a minute about who you are, where you are, because I know we're in kind of several different countries, and and then we'll come back to you afterwards. So Jackie,
okay.
Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Jackie D'Elia, and I am in the U.S. in Charlotte, North Carolina. I lived most of my life in Texas, in Houston, for about 37 years, and I just moved to Charlotte last year. I've been involved with WordPress since about 2007, and in Genesis since about 2012. And I am a designer and developer here in Charlotte, and I work with clients in building lots of different things, but primarily I've done a lot of real estate sites for clients in the past. And I really like working in Genesis, and I work in it exclusively.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Miss Carrie Dils, would you like to introduce yourself for those very few people, I'm sure, in the community who don't know who you are?
Well, at this hour, I don't know. People are, people that are awake aren't usually awake when I'm on the air. So hello, I'm Carrie. I am from deep in the heart of Texas and excited to be here this morning. I run a weekly podcast called Office Hours FM and also blog over at Carrie Dils. I'm a WordPress consultant focusing on the Genesis framework. And yeah, I think that's my story. I'm only on my second cup of coffee, so it's still
kicking in. Still kicking in. That's what we like. Peter, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, absolutely. My name's Peter Schilling. I'm a developer, and I run an agency down here in Sydney, Australia. You can bring on the more heckles about the colonialists on the UK podcast. That's fine. So we build Genesis websites. We've got a team of about 8 people that are some in Australia and around the world that work with us to build those sites. We also have a plugin shop where we have a few plugins that we've released over the last sort of 2 years or so, and spent a lot of time getting roped into organising things like this Genesis Camp, and also one of the co-organisers of WordCamp here in Sydney last year in 2014. So that's my story.
Excellent, thank you. And just before we introduce our last guest today, then I just want to say thank you very, very much to Peter and Tricia and the whole team. There's some MCs going on who are kind of introducing and setting up the sessions and so on, which kind of regular viewers might not realise, and obviously all the organisation that's gone into it. It's been a fantastic job for the videos I've seen, everything so far. So thank you to yourself, Peter, and to the rest of the team that's with you as well.
No, appreciate that. Tricia is the main driving force. She's the woman behind the scenes. But yeah, look, it's been a great team effort. It's brilliant to see something like this come together.
Yep, and it is for the whole community, which is obviously fits in very nicely with the topic for today. So the last guest then is one of my regular partners, Ben. Do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Last guest, last to turn up as well. Peter doesn't have to worry about any colonial jokes. I was born and raised in Sydney, not that you can tell from my accent. Based near Liverpool in the UK. I've been working with WordPress since 2009, Genesis 2011. Predominantly these days more of a front-end developer, but did start off as a journalist and designer. Community aspect is crucial. I would say purely and simply because I would not be where I am today without it. So, who are the community?
Excellent.
Here,
Thank you.
here.
And just to give myself an introduction as well, my name's Gary Jones. I've been part of the Genesis community since about version 1.1, maybe? I wasn't there from the very beginning, but certainly one of the earlier ones. WordPress for many, many years as well, and various other tools before that. I'm one of the co-hosts of the UK Genesis podcast, which is why you're seeing me now. And I like to help out other coders, designers, developers to improve their code, do code audits, and just try and improve the level of understanding and kind of code quality across the community. And that's why you'll often see me around. So, excellent. So, let's begin then. So we're talking about, to give it a wider kind of summary, shall we say, is we're talking about the community and perhaps how podcasts can help in that, how country-specific communities can help focus kind of and put a spotlight on the developers and designers, the Genesis professionals within that community. How is that working for everybody? How does that work best? Is it working best in the US or for the UK or for Australia? Does anybody want to share anything to kick us off on that?
Well, I suppose one thing I would say is that, where I am in my career today, if it wasn't for the first podcast in the Genesis community, Carrie's, I probably would still be messing around with widgets and, struggling to get my head around things, because it was only through the connections I made through Genesis Office Hours as it was back then that I actually managed to, sort of kick my learning of Genesis and WordPress even into a higher gear. So yeah, I mean, I think, sort of from a perspective of what can a community do, it can do an awful lot. It can really change people's lives.
That makes me so happy, Ben.
Yeah. All the love.
I feel like we're sitting around a campfire right now, and I'm very warm and fuzzy.
Do you want me to go and get my guitar? We can try.
A little kumbaya? Or God Save the Queen, but you'll have to feed me the lyrics.
No, we'll do that, yeah.
I'd like to say something too. Carrie's podcast really helped me last year when I was transitioning from being in real estate to being a developer again. I had been before in the past, and I used WordPress for my own business before and built a couple of client sites for a few people that I knew personally in the past, but hadn't really jumped in and started my own consulting business, and I really wanted to do that. Last year, I found Carrie's podcast just upon accident and started watching it, and it really encouraged me to dig back in and get back to something that I loved, which was coding and designing, and I tried to find a way to make that work with where I was at the time. But her podcast opened up the world for me for everything that was going on. I had been using Genesis, but I wasn't connected to the community. And it made a big difference. I mean, I saw the guests that came on her show, and I made lots of connections, and I started doing training and learning more, and got on Linda and got on Treehouse, and it really opened up an awful lot for me. So it was a big help for my transition.
I would agree. I think the Genesis Office Hours, was it the first podcast, certainly within the Genesis community? If not the first, one of the most prominent within the kind of our relatively niche community compared to the kind of the wider WordPress ecosystem. Obviously, there are other WordPress and more business related podcasts, but I think it was groundbreaking and a necessity for the community. And I think I'm pretty sure that the UK Genesis podcast would not have started. We wouldn't have had the confidence and haven't had the pathfinder of Genesis Office Hours as it was then, and obviously now officehours.fm to lead the way in terms of interacting in that sort of media back to the community. So I think a thank you to Carrie from the whole of the community. obviously thank you for lots of things, but just specifically in this case for the podcast, in that you've led the way, and I think the community has gained and benefited so much from that. How do you Scott? How do you see it?
You guys make me blush. From my side, it's also been an incredible connection to meet people. You do a podcast, and Gary and Ben is host of a podcast. You're not always sure who's listening on the other end, but by doing the live podcast and having Twitter going on and people able to submit questions, you see who's listening real time. And Jackie was one of the first and most engaged listeners, and which I so appreciated, because it's like, okay, somebody's actually out there. They care and they're listening. But for me, some of these relationships have meant, well, take Jackie, for example, since she's sitting right here, but that was someone I had not met. Since then, I've had the opportunity to meet in person. I'll get to see next weekend at WordCamp WordCamp Asheville. And the relationship that started just as a result of the podcast is now a friendship, and also has entered into some work collaboration opportunities. So you never know, where these little threads or connections go. But I feel like just even creating or just putting the platform out there, either in the form of the podcast or these local meetups that people do, is an incredibly effective way, at least in my experience so far, of getting people to meet and connect that might not have ever been exposed to each other otherwise. And then giving them an opportunity to do something cool together.
You mentioned meetups there, which we'll come back to in a minute, but I just want to, Peter, you had, I know there's a significant time difference there, but you had much chance to kind of get to grips with the Genesis office hours over the time it's been running?
Yes. So look, I just to back up, but I think one of the great things about the podcasts, and there's Carrie, there's Matt Medeiros, our own Australian Troy Dean, who's doing really well in the Australian podcasting, the WordPress podcasting. I think what it does, particularly for our industry, most of the people in our industry work from home. They're working in distributed companies, and it's very easy to fall into the kind of hole of thinking I'm the only person doing this. And you day in and day out, you're just very isolated. So listening to podcasts and starting to hear stories about people doing the same thing that you're doing is brilliant, and it's a great way of being able to kind of get up every day and realise that you're not the only person that's coming up against the same problems. Back to your question, yes, I've certainly hooked up with Carrie. She's on the running machine with me most mornings in the gym, backed up by Matt and a few of the other podcasts. You're all queued up one after the other, and so absolutely. And I think certainly a lot of the people, that are into WordPress will get into these podcasts and find solace into similar stories, and that's the great thing. I think certainly the Matt Report and Carrie, your podcast, in talking to, a lot of people sort of tended to in the start of those podcasts tended to head for the big names in WordPress, but as the shows have gone on, more and more you're talking to people that are just people like me, sitting here running an agency with a few people or whatever, and I think that has been that's awesome. And you hear people with the same problems that you have, solving those same problems. So yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's the crucial thing, because as great as it is to hear from people like sort of Matt Mullenweg and Chris Lemmer and these superstars of the industry, they do operate at another level, and that's not to sort of take down what they do. They do phenomenal things, but the challenges that they face are different to the challenges that someone like me, someone like Peter, someone like Gary, someone like Carrie face day to day. So the most interesting podcasts that I've listened to on Matt Medeiros's show have always been the people. I think it was the $10,000 web project. That was my favorite one. It might have been Troy who did that. I can't remember, but that was one of my favorite podcasts that I've ever listened to, because it was deep diving into the issues that I, as a developer, face, rather than sort of these big, sort of sweeping people. And, to come back to a point that Peter made as well, I think podcasts have another benefit. And like you said, Peter, working distributed can actually be quite isolating. You can be in a room by yourself for 8 hours of a day, 10 hours a day. Some people work 15, 16 hours a day. These podcasts and the ability to actually see people's interaction, even if you're interacting with them through Twitter, it's a form of socialization. And, the mental health aspect and the benefits from that can be immense. Slack, for example, all right, some people, not me, spend a little bit too much time on it. But ultimately, it comes down to, that sort of water cooler, sort of replacement for not working in a team of people like you would if you went to work in an agency.
You mentioned Slack there, and for those who don't know, there is a Genesis Slack group, of which we've got 600 and some odd. Who's trying to find it? 1 second. Sorry, 705 people in the registered for the Slack Genesis group, and it's. If anybody who isn't yet joined, might as well just mention it whilst we're here. If you go to genesis.community/Slack, then you'll see a sign-up form, Google Docs sign-up form. You can add yourself on there, and you'll kind of be invited. Who has found the Slack group useful, and how have they found it useful?
Great for organising a conference.
That too. But in terms of kind of everyday you've got all of us. I mean, I'm at home. I can see Ben's at home. Probably everybody else looks like they're at home. Who might not get out to even coffee shops kind of regularly and interact with their local community there. How does the Slack community enable production to be more productive?
From my perspective, it's like having a team of experts who, it's like working with a larger team, really. If I run into a problem, I know I can put a question out there, say I've run into this is my code, what's wrong with it? And people like Gary, will come back and they will say, oh, you've missed out a semicolon here, or you need to do a return here, or you're not printing a particular variable out, and that's what's causing the issue. And rather than sort of hitting a roadblock and not being able to progress, or having to sort of pay for somebody else who is a developer to come in and outsource this tiny little thing for you, you're able to learn how to actually do that. And it even comes down to stuff like Aline, is it Schlesler? I can't remember how to pronounce it. Yeah. I learned how to use Gulp the other day, just from his assistance over a couple of weeks in learning and setting up based on his recommendations. So again, it's one of these things that if it wasn't for the Slack group, I certainly wouldn't be anywhere near as advanced as a developer as what I am now. But equally, every day it makes you realize how much more there is to learn.
Absolutely, and before I get our guest to chip in on that as well, just from the Crowdcast chat, a couple of people, Trisha and Vaughan, are saying, yeah, they absolutely agree. Slack is a mental health benefit of that. They want to work alone, but they still want to have that communication there. So, is that something you'd agree with, Jackie and Peter and Carrie?
Sorry, I couldn't get my finger off the mute button fast enough. Yeah, it's certainly. I mean, the water cooler factor is nice. It's kind of fun to go on there even after hours and just see what people are working on and are up to. And just to echo what other people have said, it's a great place to get a lot of smart people to chime in with an opinion or a bit of code. I think I went on Tanya, who's presenting later today. I posted once about, had anybody seen a plugin that could get rid of duplicate post meta in the database? And she was like, no, I haven't seen a plugin, but I think I can write that. So, I mean, she produced a plugin within a half hour, and to me, that's just incredibly generous. She didn't have to do anything. I'm sure she had work of her own to do, but she stopped and did something to help me out, and which to me embodies the whole kind of community, the benefit of community that you see in Slack and you see in the podcast, and yeah. thumbs up.
Jackie?
Yeah, I've found Slack to be very helpful. One of the nice things, too, is it's kind of a private community, so you can feel free to ask questions, things you don't know, and it's not the same as just putting it out on Twitter or something. So, and you've got a little more, ability to put more details in and files and things to share. So it's a great way to get mentoring from other people that are in the community and to offer help to others, to share things that you've done. I just did a plug-in last week and put it on there and got some good comments from people, and it's a nice way to stay up to date with what's going on in the community.
I would say one more plus one for Slack. Genesis has communities on pretty much every social media platform, and then there's also, of course, a support forum where people can ask questions. And I'm not knocking anything that's. I hate to get controversial so early in the morning over here, but the Facebook group and particularly the support forums are very one way. It's a I need a question. Do you have an answer? There's not a lot of give and take. It's just sort of take. And the Facebook group to a much lesser degree. I probably shouldn't have thrown that one in there, but. I really enjoy about Slack that it's a very it's two-way communication. I mean, you're there, and yeah, sometimes you're asking questions, but you're also providing a lot of help for others in the process. Just throw that in there.
Yeah.
And I mean, the thing is, sorry, Gary.
Go ahead, Peter.
I was just going to embellish on what Carrie's saying. I think that it's probably a byproduct of the fact that everybody on that Genesis Slack channel. They're developers, So a lot of the other forums, I guess, you have a lot of end users in there, which makes it that kind of situation. There's lots of people asking questions, and lots of the Genesis Slack channel, because there's mainly developers or designers, people using Genesis as a tool. It's it's a different community, and I think that reflects in what we get out of it.
Ben, did you have a point to make on that?
I did. Memory is failing me. That was it. One thing that I would probably stress, and it can be quite intimidating to come into a group where there are people who are very well known within the community, like Carrie, like Gary, and feel that you couldn't possibly offer anything to the group. What I would stress is don't think like that. Everybody knows something more than other people, and there are things that even believe it or not, to those people who look up to Carrie and Gary as these sort of development overlords, there are things that we all don't know that we're not necessarily the best people at, and you might know something more than we know. I think one of the things that's worked so well with the Slack community is that there are no egos. There are no, sort of cliques. It really comes down to, you get out of it what you put in, and even, sort of within the wider WordPress community, I think it's quite unique because you look at the WordPress Slack group, it's not as closely knit or as generous as what the Genesis Slack group is.
Absolutely. I mean, I went to PHP South Coast, is obviously a different conference yesterday, actually, and the keynote speaker there was Cal Evans, who, for those who don't know, is one of the prominent guys in the PHP community. He worked for Zend, of Zend Framework and Zend Server, and he was one of their kind of community liaison engagement guys there. And yeah, basically a legend within PHP. And he said that for him, there's kind of three pillars of having a successful community. His first was that you need role models. Now, I mean, obviously he was listing folks within the PHP kind of community who actually write in the PHP language, writing the C that produces a PHP language. But it was looking at not necessarily the best coders or yeah, the number one in any kind of way, shape or form, but some people saw them as role models, and obviously those role models will have other people who are their role models. So although a community can have role models, everyone's might be kind of slightly different. The second one, I think we do have that within the Genesis community, which is why we're one of the reasons why I think we do well on that with people like Carrie and so on. we then have his second pillar was the community needs an ecosystem. So you've got people who are producing premium plugins, premium themes, and also the ecosystem around kind of free themes, free plugins, and so on. So there is a whole ecosystem there that's not just kind of, you've got kind of Copyblogger Media at the top and Genesis and kind of that's it. There's a lot of things that go with Genesis, free or premium, that has these products as part of the ecosystem. And his third one, that Cal Evans, his third one was about positive energy, and I think probably that's one for me is one of the most important. Within Genesis community, I feel pretty much we have 99% positive energy, and positive energy wasn't quite the word he was looking for, but it was kind of close enough to the point he was trying to get across, that you could spend all day having kind of WP drama and kind of the negative aspects and trying to take pot shots at people and put people down. But within Genesis, everything is positive. Everything is trying to help other people. You come to the Slack group, you go to the Facebook group, you kind of ask a question on Twitter. You've got people who produce plugins in half an hour for somebody else, even though they're probably busy doing other bits and pieces. And I think that for me is probably the most important pillar, and it's why the Genesis community works for a lot of people, in that we have these different aspects that that help guide us along and kind of motivate us to go along. Everyone's on mute, so nobody wants to answer that. Any points on that? Peter, you're unmuted first. Go ahead.
I didn't have a point to make, sorry.
Okay.
No, I was just going to say, I wonder, like, what created that atmosphere? Because the WordPress community in general is, you know, WP drama aside, a very generous community, and Genesis is a sub-segment of that, even more intensely so. Gary, as you were saying, a very positive place to be. And is that because, you know, did that roll down from the top, so to speak, from Gardner in the early days, or is it because that Studio Press has sort of embraced the community and is very supportive of the community? Or I mean that I'm answering your question with or comment with another question, but it's sort of interesting to ponder. How did this particular ecosystem develop to be as friendly as it is?
I think for me it's because we are a subsystem of WordPress, and although WordPress community has got issues, I think that perhaps the WordPress feeling comes from the PHP or just the open source community, in that everybody is, well, not everybody, but the majority of people are, if they get help, they're then trying to pay it forward. So they'll write a tutorial because someone helped them out for something. They will produce a plugin because they worked out a solution, and it's easier for them to just write that code once as a plugin and then just give it to anybody else and so on. So I think perhaps the whole open source about paying it forward has just kind of manifested itself in such a way that we then hit the kind of those three pillars, or however else somebody wants to see within that community. Okay, moving on then. So if you've got any other questions, how far we've got? About 25 minutes, so we're just over halfway through. If you've got any other questions, get yourself to Crowdcast and ask some questions on there. Just at the bottom underneath the video going on there, you can see it says ask a question or suggest a topic, so get some bits in there, and we'll get those answered later on. Obviously, one thing we've kind of looked at is the country-specific issue for the UK Genesis. They originally manifested because we were trying to create a directory or some sort of list of the UK or the professionals who are predominantly in the UK or work in the UK who work with Genesis, so that if I've got a lead and I'm too busy, I can just say, hey, go and look at this list here, find somebody else who matches your criteria of being in the UK and work with Genesis. Is there anything? I mean, obviously we know there are kind of users and developers and designers within the different countries, but is there anything similar, sort of community-focused, country-specific focused within Australia or America?
Yeah, in Australia we have a Slack channel, so we have WP AU. It's certainly not. It's not as not as large as the Genesis community, although you know, we have a lot of developers and agencies down here in Australia. But yeah, so we have a Slack channel, and that again was it's a group that you know, it's people that are organising the WordCamps and the other kind of meetups and the like, and it does just what you've mentioned, where there's leads that are sort of flying between people that, you know, we can't do this work, so maybe we can find someone else that can do that kind of work. But other than that, you know, there's I'm not aware of an Australian-specific Facebook group that operates. There was a few guys, the guys from Human Made Australia tried to get going a website, WP.org, that was running on BB Press, and it petered out in favour of Slack. But yeah, so we have that group, and it plods along. But I guess the problem that we've got, and I think it's something that probably a lot of country code or country groups would have, is how do you get people that are using WordPress not totally inside the community to actually come and participate in those kind of things. So I know when we had WordCamp here in Sydney at the end of last year, people just came out of the woodwork, and we were kind of looking at ourselves going, who are all these people that are working, you know, in agencies and this kind of stuff, and you never see them at meetups and never see them online. So the WordPress users that are out there using it all the time, but are not actually part of the community as such, inside the community. Does that make sense?
Yeah. How are we going to engage more people? I think is what you're asking there. Jackie, any thoughts on how we can engage more people to participate in the community aspect and not just being users of a particular product or tool?
Well, I mean, for me, I've gone to a couple of meetups here in Charlotte and got to meet some people, and we're just sharing information with them about UK Genesis, about office hours, and about other things, just to let people know that all of these things are out there for people. There's a lot of people that you'll meet, especially at meetups, that just work in WordPress, and they just do it during the day, and they're stopping in. Maybe they want to try to learn something or listen to a speaker, but might not know about all of the other different things that are there. I mean, like for me, last year, getting to talk with Carrie got me to go to the Dallas-Fort Worth WordCamp, and that opened up a lot of doors where I got to meet a lot of other people and get more involved. I started writing tutorials on my blog and started doing writing some plugins. Those things I don't think would have occurred had I not gotten involved.
Absolutely. Thumbs up from Carrie as well. Yeah, I mean, in terms of the kind of the meetups and so on, obviously they're important, and I think they're a key way of. If somebody has already gone to a meetup, though, they're kind of trying to be part of that community. So try and get involved in the more niche communities is perhaps a positive thing that, or more possible thing, shall we say, of doing that. So, Ben, you're nodding. Do you agree?
Hmm?
I said, Ben, you're nodding. Do you agree that?
Yeah, sorry.
I think he was nodding to his wife to get him another cup of coffee.
No,
we'll put order in this time.
No, as some people know, before I became a developer, I was a journalist. One thing that I learned during that time was often it's not what you know, it's who you know. That's the far more important thing. And as Jackie has demonstrated, you know, being able to go to these type of events, and I think to some extent podcasts are an extension of WordCamps in the sense that they give people the ability to connect with the community on a weekly or fortnightly basis, you know, to actually find out what's going on. And, you know, just having attended a couple of WordCamps myself, it becomes very clear to you that, you know, the hallway track, as we all jokingly call it, is actually where you learn more and you end up creating connections that aren't just a hi, shake a hand, take a business card and never speak to them again. These are people who have real tangible impacts on your life and your career going forward, whether that's because it's somebody who can pass on business, whether it's because somebody who teaches you something that you didn't know how to do and all of a sudden you've done. A great example of that would be the fact that ACF, Advanced Custom Fields, spread like wildfire throughout the Slack community when people finally started getting their head around how to use it and where the benefits are. And thirdly, just being it, people are more inclined to deal with people who they feel they know. I'm sure Carrie has probably experienced it to some extent when you've gone to work camps and people have come up to you and they've sort of had that feeling that they know you even though they've never met you because they've watched you on the podcast all the time.
Yeah, it's kind of weird.
Yeah.
But I realize I put all of that out there, right? Like I even say the names of my dog. So when somebody comes up and they're like, "Hey, how's Bert? How's Major?" and I'm like, "Have I met you before?" No, it is a strange kind of sense.
But I think that's the crucial thing. It gives people that sort of sense of connection and sense of community that it's one of the crucial things. What's that saying? Is it no man's an island, or I can't remember exactly what it is, but the idea is that you cannot exist on your own in a bubble. If you want to really make the most of your skills and your personal experience, it has to be as part of a community. And podcasts, because word camps can be expensive to travel to, they can be infrequent. Podcasts, I think, are the natural route into the wider WordPress community, and for that reason, I think they have a very powerful role to play within actually taking that person from the I make websites using WordPress to I'm a WordPress developer and I am a part of the community.
Absolutely. I think the Genesis Camp is a great example that is kind of over and above a kind of a weekly or fortnightly podcast that can encourage those connections and feel like you know somebody because you've had a deeper insight to what they've said than for those people who for whatever reason can't get to or don't want to go out and actually physically meet people. One of the things that was mentioned at this conference yesterday was that the talks are often for talks at conference are often the thing that you sell to your boss in terms of being allowed to go and being kind of funded to go for the expenses, but it's the value from it is the kind of the relationships that you make either in the hallway track or kind of through getting to know somebody after they've kind of done their talk.
Can I just, Vaughan's just put up something there. He just said, I would never have known or learned so much about ACF if it hadn't been for the Slack crew. Can I just twist that? I would have a lot more money in my bank balance if it wasn't for Carrie's podcast.
What?
Desktop server, WP, Migrate DB. But
do you regret any of those spends?
Again, I mean, it comes down to this. These are tools that make my life so much easier, but I wouldn't have come across them if it wasn't for that type of thing. And it's as Gary, as when we were discussing this at WordCamp London, there have been things that people have found out, tools that they found out about at say for example in the hallway track that they just would never have known, and when they've gone back, it's had a real tangible impact on their workflow.
I can chime in on that too. For me, that's played a huge part in my workflow just from last year. Just getting exposed to things, and mostly from Carrie's podcast. I just have to say that a lot of the tools I use and a lot of the things I'm doing every day now are a result of something that I heard about on the podcast or a guest mentioned, and I followed up. I mean, before last year, I was working on a site on a live web server, and wasn't using a local development, and I got exposed to desktop server, and I just latched onto that, and now I use it every day. I'm spinning up sites. If I need to test something, I can just spin up a site and test it. That one thing made a huge difference. Learning Git was another one for me that hadn't been exposed to any of that. I used to be a software developer, but it was in the 80s and the early 90s, so I was back coding in FoxPro and DBase, and there wasn't any of those things. And today, just getting exposed to all of that has just made a huge difference in my ability to produce work every day. I really like that. So those tools that I learned on the podcast have helped me just transform where I'm going. I mean, it's been a big plus for me.
I think we've got a couple of questions coming on the Crowdcast as well. So just before we jump to those, we've mentioned about kind of individual podcasts and Genesis Camp and kind of going to local meetups and going to conferences. I guess kind of the ultimate one of that would be a Genesis-specific event. Is that something, depending who, what, where, and why, that people would be willing to attend and would really benefit the community?
I think there was some mention of it, wasn't there, around the idea of hooking it onto the back of authority, but I think part of the problem is that no matter where you hold it, people are going to lose out, and invariably a Genesis-specific event would probably happen in the US, quite fairly. I would expect it would probably be held in, I don't know, say probably Chicago, it being the backyard of Studio Press. So I think this type of event's probably got more exposure, but there's benefits and there's negatives, and ultimately I think it comes down to what do you place more emphasis on, the things that are being talked about or the hallway track. But I mean, at the end of the day, to some extent, a lot of developers can be quite shy, and being able to just chat on Crowdcast is actually more likely to sort of get people getting off the wall essentially and actually talking to people. So
I mean, let's ask probably kind of our furthest guest today, kind of Peter. If there was something, say in America, would you feel it was worth your time and effort to get to a Genesis WordCamp type event? If it was purely about kind of Genesis and so on, is that something you think would be worthwhile?
Yeah, look, absolutely. It's a long haul from us to anywhere except for New Zealand, so it is quite a trek. But I went to Pressnomics January this year, and it was awesome. I had a great time there, met lots of people, and it is very, very good to meet people face to face, and that you listen to, or you've heard an episode they're on a podcast or whatever. Yeah, and look, a lot of Australians do travel, so at that event there was half a dozen Australians there. So we do have aeroplanes, and they can go all the way to North America. And I think because we're all we're all small business owners, it's a bit of a junket. You get on an aeroplane and then stick around and do something for a couple of weeks. So I think it's very accessible. I love it. So the answer is yes.
Excellent. Okay, so we've got a few questions coming in. So in top voting at the moment is a question from Trisha, who I thought was be asleep by now, as she's done however many hours straight now. She says, what do you think the Genesis community will be like in 5 years from now? Carrie, should we start with you?
Hooey. I mean, it's all conjecture, right? A lot of that is dependent. Well, let's take it a step back further. So the community is somewhat contingent, of course, on the software Genesis being actively developed and around. So my first question is, what does Genesis look like in 5 years? A lot of folks have posed those questions to both of the Brians from Copyblogger, and not to go too far on the side of folks thinking that there's a lot more attention being paid to Rainmaker than Genesis right now. But I think Genesis will continue to be under active development, and whether that is under the official Copyblogger umbrella, or whether passionate developers like are sitting here attending this conference decide to take over. Should Copyblogger not want to maintain it? And these are, I'm not trying to start rumors here. I'm just giving pontificating. Anyhow, as long as the software is around, I feel like the community will be around. So that's the long
I think really the only major threat, in a sense, and even then, I don't think it is a threat, because realistically, one of the strengths of StudioPress and Genesis is how easy it is for beginners to pick it up and run with it. All right, yeah, it takes a long time to get to, you know, sort of become well acquainted with advanced features like Genesis attributes and Genesis markup overrides and stuff, but you can pick it up and run with it very quickly. I think, and it's not Genesis specifically that I think is, you know, sort of the next 5 years of this will depend on, but it's where the REST API goes and how much, you know, Automatic and, you know, the WordPress Foundation sort of push things in the direction of the REST Foundation, where for people who don't know, REST is a way of splitting the back end from the front end, so it's not necessarily that PHP or the WordPress PHP is building the website. You can build it with a JavaScript front end, and have WordPress as a database essentially feeding. That's right, Gary?
Pretty much, yeah. It's a way to access the data without having the user interface, in short.
Yeah, and obviously it will depend on, you know, sort of where that goes, because if it does go very JavaScript heavy, then where Genesis fits in with that is, you know, unclear. There could be a Genesis framework JavaScript edition that comes out. We just don't know. You know, technology moves very quickly. I mean, I suppose you could argue that if you look at it, Genesis hasn't even really been around for 5 years. So where it'll be in another 5 years is anybody's guess. I think even the two Brians would struggle to, you know, sort of accurately guess where it will be.
Yeah. Bonus points for Carrie for using the word pontification there, so we like that one. We've just got just under 5 minutes left to go. There's a question on there that Jo has asked, which I think could be quite interesting, is that she asks, is the community getting bigger and more influential than StudioPress itself? To paraphrase that in perhaps a slightly different way, is the weight that StudioPress or Copyblogger have within the community diminishing? Jackie, any thoughts on that?
I see it as diminishing. I do. I see a lot more information being put out by people that are not affiliated or associated with Copyblogger and StudioPress, and I see it as, I think that's a very positive thing. Carrie mentioned, you know, the Rainmaker issue and, you know, how much time is being spent developing that, and I think the way I look at it is I'm sure, you know, Copyblogger's looking at ways to make sure that it's got some viable products in the future, and services, you know, offering something as a service is a great way to go, and something like Rainmaker, that makes a lot of sense. The model for, you know, doing Genesis going forward may not make as much sense, and it may not play as big of a part in a revenue stream for them. So I think there's lots of other people that are taking up that and getting more involved in doing it. I wouldn't be surprised to see if there's a lot more development on that is outside of what they're offering.
I think it's an interesting point. You know, the reality is that Copyblogger is a business, and it needs to make money to stay afloat and stay growing. And, you know, to some extent, if Rainmaker is going to be their main revenue source, that's not a threat, because at the end of the day, if that's the only way that they can stay afloat, I'm sure that's not the only way, but if that's the way that they're going to stay afloat, that's the only way that Genesis is going to stay afloat, because for a large part, there really is no Genesis without Copyblogger these days, although it could be forked and it could be, you know, carried on being developed. You know, there's been quite a lot of criticism of Nathan and the team's resources being taken elsewhere, but I mean, I think as we've seen, just even from a theme basis, there have been quite a few developments that have been created in the Rainmaker platform that are coming back to Genesis now.
Peter, do you see the perhaps, I assume you agree, so the diminishing impact that they have in the community, that they've created this thing and Genesis and now potentially abandon it to work on other things, or do you see it as they've created this thing and enable it to have its own life, to have the community to bolster it and push it forwards?
Yeah, look, I think their diminished involvement or less involvement is just it's progression of the fact that it's so popular. There are so many people doing so many different things with Genesis, and I think someone mentioned the quantity of tutorials and podcasts and whatever else about Genesis is just a reflection of the fact that the community is huge. The amount of people using it is huge, and I think the reason why the number of people using it is large is because right now it's the best tool for a particular job. And while it remains being the best tool for the job that we use it for, I think it'll be steady as she goes. I mean, when it's not the best tool to build websites and deliver the kind of things that we deliver to customers, then I guess we all start looking around for something else that's going to rise up, and probably that'll happen. And that's not a bad thing. Things come and go. It's just a natural progression.
I would agree. And just to chime in one more thing, to piggyback on what Ben said, we very much want Copyblogger to succeed, right? Because there are everything that they preach through their content marketing comes back to people looking for services based around Genesis and Rainmaker, which is what we as service providers are, and even product creators are doing. So our success is largely based, just what Peter said, for as long as we choose to use this tool, our success is based on their success, for sure.
And I think that, if you look at Brian's philosophy when it comes to, extending Genesis, it has always been, if you have an idea and it doesn't exist, go out, make it. If it's a great idea, we'll help you promote it, but we're not going to do it ourselves. And that has a reinforcing effect on the community that, we have all been able to build our businesses around a product that really, Brian and Copyblogger could have very much done a closed source system in a sense, and done the Microsoft approach of, you've built this really cool tool, we're going to basically copy it and then put something out and just knock you out of the market. They're absolutely about as far away from that as you possibly can be, possibly unless you were building something like Rainmaker, but that's, at the end of the day, I think we've been extremely fortunate to be able to build a business community and a community as a whole around a product that has been set up in the way that Brian and the rest of the team at Studio Press and Copyblogger have run with it.
Absolutely. Peter, did you want to make a point?
Yeah,
on
I was just going to make a quick point. I mean, people get concerned about Rainmaker, and you could draw the same analogy. People get concerned about WordPress.com and say, they're doing this and they're adding e-commerce, and so will anyone want to have a self-built or self-hosted WordPress site in the future? And it's just crazy talk, because as agencies building WordPress sites, we're adding the value. We are doing all these things that are bespoke for each individual site, and those platforms are not set up for that. They do one thing, they do it really, really well. I think there's always going to be a hole for service providers that are building the sites, both in that analogy of WordPress.com and in Rainmaker and Genesis.
Yep. And we have just about, I think we have just slightly overrun our time now, so we'll just run along the line and have some kind of final words about kind of community, country specific, podcasts and so on, just to kind of summarize it up. I think for me, we as a community are doing a fantastic job. I think we just need to continue what we're doing. As Ben referred to, as to what kind of Brian Gardner's kind of philosophy is that if it's not there, go and build it, and if it's good enough, you'll be supported by the community, by Copyblogger, by wider WordPress and PHP communities. So I think, just carry on with what you're doing. I think we're doing a fantastic job. Peter, any final words from yourself?
No, I'm good. I've got to go to sleep now. I'm really, really tired.
Thank you for joining us before you head to bed. Carrie?
Yes, I would say that a rising tide lifts all boats. And sorry, Rian, that is perhaps some American slang. But in other words, as the community does well, so we will individually do well. So.
Thank you, Carrie, for joining us. Ben?
I'd just add to your point about, sort of, if it doesn't exist, build it. If it doesn't exist and you want to build it and you don't know how to do a particular part, team up. This is a phenomenal community. That is the absolute, sort of community in a nutshell. If you can't do one part, find somebody, team up. They will team up, and you can then, take over the world if you want to.
Excellent. Yep. Thank you. And Jackie, do you want to finish us off with some final words, please?
Yes. Just wanted to say thank you for inviting me and having me here. It's been great. The community is wonderful, and I think that for me, it's been a great experience to be able to learn new things, but I've also taken a lot of time to share things that I've learned as well, and I think that embraces or just encapsulates the whole thing about the Genesis community. Is I may be learning from other people that know more than me right now, but I'm also sharing things that somebody else who's just starting off may not be exposed to yet. So it's a great community, and I really appreciate it.
Excellent, and thank you for joining us today. So thank you to all of my guests, to Ben, to Carrie, to Peter, to Jackie, and thank you to the community for listening. Until we meet next time. Thank you very much. Bye bye. At this point, we're all going to sit here until somebody presses the button.
I don't know where the button is.
I think Peter was our button pusher.
There is no button.
Peter has the button, and he's gone.
I guess we can just if we all end the call, it's...
Bye, guys.
Bye.
See you later.
Organization.